Oscar Novak and his business partner, Peter Steinberg, go over their game plan as they head towards what could easily be the biggest meeting of their careers. Oscar is anxious, recounting to Peter a terrible nightmare he had last night where he dreamt he went into the meeting wearing nothing but a doily. Peter knows Oscar's got a tendency to babble when he's nervous, often volunteering embarrassing and unnecessary stories, so he assigns him a discreet signal, a simple clicking of his pen, so that he'll know when to shut up before he blows their deal. The owner of the massive building, multimillionaire Charles Newman, is upstairs in a secret bedroom, flirting with his quirky, playful girlfriend, Amy Post, when they're interrupted by his secretary Lenore, who not so gently reminds him he's got back-to-back meetings soon, and that his wife expects to see him for dinner at the Ritz tonight. Hearing her cue, Amy grabs her things, kisses Charles goodbye, and makes herself scarce. He pouts, wishing they could have spent more time together. Lenore leaves Charles to get his act together, but while preparing for the meetings, she passes Oscar and Peter in the hallway having a moment. Before they enter the waiting room, Oscar stops Peter, feeling emotional, and deeply thanks him for giving him the opportunity to work with him, expressing gratitude for their years of partnership. Peter gives him a hug, calling him the best partner a man could ask for, and Lenore, witnessing only part of the interaction, gets the wrong idea, assuming the pair are gay. Novak and Steinberg enter the waiting room, to be sarcastically greeted by their arch-nemeses, Decker and Strauss, who compliment them on their wonderful work designing a men's public restroom, loosely comparing it to a mural they designed in the lobby of the Hancock Building. Lenore interrupts the pissing contest, no pun intended, to call in the first pair, Decker and Strauss. Decker and Strauss show their model as a VR simulation. Their idea is a completely modern and extensive redesign of the building. Charles is impressed with their presentation, and shortly after, Novak and Steinberg are called in for theirs. Before Decker and Strauss leave, Lenore, being nosy, asks the pair if Novak and Steinberg are truly partners, meaning gay lovers, in this context. Strauss starts clarifying that Peter absolutely is gay, but as he's about to mention that Oscar isn't, Decker chimes in, lying. Decker, assuming that this will reflect badly on them, lays the story on thick, saying that the pair go to the parades, bars, and engage in the sexual activities of gay men. Oscar and Peter enter Charles's office, greeting him with a handshake. Oscar notes the Buddha figurines in his office, and immediately starts babbling out a story from his college days, to much annoyed pen clicking from Peter. After Peter reins him in, the two show Charles their renovation plans the old-fashioned way, and aptly so, too, as the design they have in mind maintains the classic look and feel of the building, while giving it a lot of TLC. Charles likes theirs, and orders Lenore to send Decker and Strauss back in. He compliments both design concepts and their contrasting views, giving special mentions to Oscar, whom he particularly likes for his genuine, passionate, and lovably goofy personality during the pitch. Charles lays his plan down. He wants both pairs to craft large models of their designs in the Telford building itself, and have the press and patrons attend the event to see who he decides will be the official winner of the contract. The only catch is that each pair must pay for the construction of the models out of their own budget. This poses no problem for the well-funded Decker and Strauss, but Peter and Oscar are broke, and will struggle for the $150,000 needed to build the model. Oscar feels a bit hopeless about the situation, but Peter encourages him that they're going to win the contract and kick some butt. Oscar grabs his friend's face, kissing his cheeks enthusiastically while declaring his platonic love for Peter's go-getter outlook. Lenore and Charles walk in on this declaration, creating quite the awkward moment. Charles murmurs to Lenore after their exit about how close Oscar and Peter seem to be, and she lets the rumor that Decker and Strauss started, that the pair are a gay couple, slip to her employer. Charles notes that fact with a nod of interest. Later, Charles visits Amy at her workshop, to break the news to her that he'll be unable to attend her opening at the art gallery this weekend, due to a benefit his wife Olivia has been planning for months. Amy brushes it off as if it's no problem. But Charles claims he's sick of the whole thing, expressing his annoyance with the fact that one of her exes might use his absence as a way to get back into her life. He's got a couple in mind that he particularly hates, one being an art student at her college who paints flags on people's butts and photographs them, and the other being Kevin Cartwright, a professional football player whose muscles he describes as grotesque. Amy gives Charles a look as Kevin enters behind him. He smooches Amy on the cheek before leaving, and Charles is left looking like a fool. Peter explains to Charles their vision for the Telford, but Charles is distracted, suddenly asking for a word with Oscar in private. Charles chats Oscar up with small talk, first inquiring if his last name is Hungarian, which Oscar confirms. Charles begins to mention that Lenore told him about Oscar and Peter being gay, but he stops the sentence before mentioning the word, as if it were taboo to say out loud, and continues by saying he's proud to have people from Oscar and Peter's background in his company. Oscar, still thinking Charles is talking about being Hungarian, clarifies that Peter isn't, but that he is 100%, which leads Charles into thinking that Peter is straight and Oscar is gay. Charles segues into his point, revealing to Oscar that he's married, but has a girlfriend, Amy, whom he considers very special. He tells Oscar about the art exhibition tonight and his inability to attend, which upsets him, practically ordering Oscar to attend the event in lieu of himself. He orders him to stick to Amy and spy on any of the men she might talk to that night, particularly Kevin Cartwright, and report his findings back to Charles after the event. Charles doesn't even wait for a response from Oscar after selfishly tasking him with this very personal mission. Oscar's friends, Rick, Zach, and Bill, sit on his couch in his apartment, absorbed in the football game, while Oscar discusses what happened with Charles earlier with a very anxious Peter. Peter thinks this spying mission is a terrible idea, but his other friends don't see what the big problem is. Oscar admits that he has no clue what the woman looks like, but reveals to his friends that she used to date Kevin Cartwright before dating Charles, and the men are impressed, bringing up a popular rumor about Kevin's masculine endowment. Peter gingerly reminds them that not only is this Amy, being the mistress of a millionaire, likely to be a very foxy one, but that Oscar can't control himself around beautiful women. This situation could cost them a multi-million-dollar contract, the biggest of their career. Oscar rolls his eyes, claiming he's not that much of a sucker for women. He does have some degree of self-control, and with that, he quickly bounces out the door before Peter can further argue. The boys on the couch start laughing. Peter is so screwed. Oscar arrives at the art exhibition, eyeing all the pieces curiously, especially the portraits of flags on people's. He eventually finds Amy's section, where he pauses to admire one of her pieces. One of the guests accidentally bumps the piece, causing it to rock and begin to fall. Oscar, seeing the impending disaster as it happens, runs across the room, catching the sculpture right before it hits the floor, saving it from destruction, to much applause from the other guests. Amy appears, cursing at the thing's terrible mounting, and thanks Oscar for saving her sculpture and therefore, her. Oscar stutters out that something as beautiful as her should be protected, but then quickly realizes what he said, clarifying that he meant the sculpture, not her, but Amy blushes anyway. He's wowed by the sight of her smile. After the debacle, Oscar's approached by Kevin, who compliments him on his great catch earlier. Oscar, a huge fan of Kevin's, is flabbergasted by the compliment, considering his statistics, but when talking about it, accidentally makes mention of his male appendage without realizing, completely embarrassing himself. Luckily, Kevin is merciful and pretends he didn't hear. Trying to do his job, Oscar inquires if Kevin's there tonight with anyone, and he admits that he's a friend of Amy's. With no sense of subtlety, Oscar continues interrogating him on what he'll be doing after the show, if he came with anyone aside from Amy tonight. And as if on cue, one of the women in his entourage calls Kevin over. As Oscar exits the gallery, he's stopped by Amy, who invites him out to an after-party across town that's being held for the artists. She wants to buy him a drink, to pay him back for saving her. Oscar tries to decline, but to no avail, and the two end up in a taxi together. Amy suddenly realizes Oscar's last name is Novak and recognizes him, simply explaining that she knows Charles Newman, and congratulating him on the Telford job. Oscar confides he knows every curve of the Telford, as if it were a person to him, and Amy confesses she feels the same about her artwork, often treating them like children. Just as the couple are hitting it off, the taxi they're in suddenly breaks down. The taxi driver starts yelling angrily in Mandarin, and Oscar gets out of the car to check the engine, which blows up as soon as he pops the hood. Amy gets out of the car to check the damage, before grabbing Oscar and running off into the distance, much to the dismay of the already pissed-off driver. The two walk through pouring rain while Amy makes a weird noise with her mouth, which she explains to Oscar is her making 3 sounds at once. She steps in a huge puddle of mud, getting her shoe stuck in it. Oscar offers to remove it for her, but Amy yanks it out herself, and ends up accidentally hitting Oscar in the face with it. The two run for shelter into a small diner. They ask their surly waiter what's good, and he recommends the tuna melt, so they order 2. Amy asks Oscar if he's seeing someone at the moment, and he admits he isn't. He's got trouble finding compatible partners. They always want to sleep on his side of the bed. He prefers the left side, and coincidentally, so does Amy. The waiter arrives with their food, and Oscar eyes it suspiciously. Amy eats hers with no second thought or hesitation. They exit the diner, and Oscar's stomach gurgles loudly. He looks dizzy and almost blue, clearly sick from the tuna melt. Amy apologizes, explaining that she's used to bad food because her mother was a terrible cook, and her description of her mother's dishes are enough to put Oscar over the edge. He vomits in front of her. Amy rubs his back, assuring him he'll feel better, when suddenly, she vomits too. As the pair walk the streets again, Amy asks him if he still wants to go to the party, and sarcastically, he says yes. Amy whistles for a cab, and a rickety old taxi stops for them. Oscar questions how safe the vehicle truly is, but Amy assures him it's fine, tugging the handle to open the door for him, when it breaks in her hands and she hits Oscar square in the family jewels. After that, they change their minds about the party. They get back to Amy's place, and she apologizes again before admitting to Oscar that she really enjoyed their catastrophic night together. He firmly agrees. Eager to see him again, Amy invites him to come to her shop sometime. The couple bid each other goodnight, and Oscar happily leaps back to his apartment at 6 in the morning, only to be greeted by a very manic Peter, who interrogates him on what happened. Oscar recounts the disastrous night, but the smile on his face belies his emotions. Peter knows Oscar's fallen in love with her. Oscar doesn't even deny it. Peter laments he'll become a beggar by the end of this debacle, thanks to Oscar's weakness for women, reminding him that all his previous relationships went nowhere fast. Oscar resents that statement, but tries to explain to Peter how amazing Amy is. While Peter's sure Amy is beautiful, complicated, and enticing, he reminds Oscar that this project could make all of their dreams come true. And the future of their careers is riding on this. There will always be beautiful women, but there'll only be $1 million chance. He begs Oscar to stay away from Amy, and hesitantly, Oscar agrees. Construction of the models are underway when Oscar receives a call from Charles, asking how last night went. Oscar assures Charles he's got nothing to worry about where Kevin's concerned, and Charles is so pleased with the job he's doing that he asks Oscar to stick to Amy even more. Peter, eavesdropping on the conversation, tries to convince Oscar to say no, but hearing the firmness in Charles's voice, buckles and changes his tune, so Oscar ends up agreeing to continue seeing Amy, much to Peter's chagrin. Charles tries to charm Amy with an expensive gift, but she declines. She never accepts any of his gifts. She expects a cross-examination about the events of the art show last night, but Charles claims he's trying to be more okay with Amy going out on her own. Amy knows better than that though, casually mentioning that she met Oscar last night, testing the waters to see Charles' reaction. However, when Charles mentions that Oscar is gay, Amy's visibly disappointed. Oscar visits Amy at her shop, where she confesses that she almost started having a crush on him the other night, and that she's having an affair with Charles Newman. She reveals she's figured out that he's been sent to spy on her by Charles, which she's obviously pissed about. Oscar feels terrible and apologizes for lying to her, explaining that he didn't want to deceive her. It's just that Charles holds the future of their careers in his hands, and that when he met Amy, he was so charmed by her, he just wanted to get to know her better. Amy accepts his heartfelt apology, but uses her newfound power to coerce Oscar into spending even more time with her, threatening to tell Charles he made a pass at her if he doesn't. The pair head to Amy's place, where she confides to Oscar that he feels so familiar, as if they've met in another life. Amy grabs a bottle of champagne from her fridge, telling Oscar they'll have dinner to celebrate their new, covert agreement. Amy starts stripping to head into the shower, and Oscar is briefly distracted before he pops the champagne and puts the music on. He hears her discordant singing from the shower and lowers the music to listen, quietly chuckling outside the bathroom door. Oscar trips, scrambling back over to the kitchen when he hears her exiting, smoothly acting like everything's normal. Collecting her glass, Amy proposes a toast, but they pause, unsure of what to toast to, when suddenly Charles enters. Amy lightly scolds him, wondering if he doesn't call before coming anymore, but Charles is too busy taking in the ambience. Music, dark lights, Amy in a kimono. He swears that if Oscar weren't gay, he'd think he was up to something nefarious. Oscar stutters over the gay part, immediately denying it. But Amy and Charles insist he doesn't need to hide. They don't care what Oscar does in the privacy of his bedroom. Oscar heads to Peter's place, interrupting his monthly gay dinner party. He breaks the news to Peter that both Amy and Charles think he's gay, and sensitively going on to say how embarrassing and humiliating it is. Realizing what he's said, he apologizes to his friend, trying to explain that it's not that he has a problem with he just doesn't like being perceived as such. Peter considers whether he wants to recover gracefully from his friend's insults, or kneecap him. Oscar views this as a huge problem, asking Peter what they are going to do about it. But Peter doesn't see what this has to do with him. He warned Oscar beforehand about his little spy mission, but he didn't listen. As far as Peter's concerned, Oscar's made his big gay bed, and must now slumber gaily in it. Oscar and the straight boy gang, Rick, Zach and Bill, are over at his place watching the football match as per usual. When the boys ask how the spy mission went the other day, Oscar gives a non-committal answer, and the boys immediately assume Oscar's slept with Amy, given his previous track record. Oscar clarifies that he hasn't slept with her, and clearing his throat, informs the boys that they won't be seeing him with any women for a while, claiming that he's swearing them off. Before he can say more, he's interrupted by the doorbell, and when he answers, Amy bursts in, stating she needs to stay at Oscar's place for a while due to some issues with her landlord. The boys stare at Amy as though they've never seen a woman before. When Amy asks how Oscar's testicles are doing since the incident, the boys see it fit to give the couple privacy. Amy starts making herself comfortable, asking Oscar how Kevin's doing in the game tonight. Oscar, who practically worships Kevin, lets her know that her ex is playing impressively, as usual. Amy, being cheeky, offers Oscar with a tuna sandwich that he promptly flings across the room, still having PTSD from the other night. Spotting an old picture of Amy in high school, he takes the chance to return the teasing, making fun of her dorky 80s fashion. As their laughter subsides, Amy sobers, genuinely thanking Oscar for allowing her to stay. She truly didn't have anywhere else to go, because although she has a lot of male friends, she doesn't have a lot of real friends. Just as they share a heartfelt hug, cementing the warm, fuzzy mood, they're interrupted by Charles who, much like his mistress, simply invites himself into Oscar's apartment. Charles tells Amy he arranged a room for her at the Four Seasons, but Amy insists she'll stay with Oscar, who so kindly agreed to take her in. Reluctantly, Charles agrees to her wishes, and an awkward silence settles over the three, till Oscar decides he's going to head to bed. From his spot upstairs, he can hear Charles and Amy giggling, and when he peeks out, he can see the couple starting to get physical on his couch. Not wanting to hear a thing, Oscar grabs his headphones, turning the volume all the way up. Oscar wakes the next morning tangled in his headphones, with the sound of the radio announcer screaming in his ears. Amy passes by with breakfast, and Oscar eyes Charles curiously as he breathes heavily while doing his morning yoga. Amy walks both the men out as they head to work, giving Charles a passionate goodbye kiss. As the men walk away from her, Charles asks Oscar what he's doing tonight. He flatly replies he'll be going out with Amy and her friends. Novick and Steinberg are interviewed about the new project when the reporter asks about them being an openly gay firm, and if they feel as though that fact would have any impact on the competition. Peter responds by simply saying that the pair are just focused on doing their jobs. Oscar starts responding that he doesn't think it's important what other people think of them, and the reporter presses him, asking if he doesn't feel as though he has a certain responsibility as a gay professional. Impassioned and irritated by the question, thanks to his recent experiences with Charles, Oscar snaps that if they're talented and have the skills, they shouldn't need to back that up by pretending to be something they're not. He goes on to boldly state that it shouldn't matter if they're gay or straight, they're individuals first, and people need to accept them for who they are. Oscar delivers his speech so genuinely that Peter has to whisper in his ear and remind him that he's not actually gay. Amy tries to cheer up a depressed Oscar that night at a bar, thinking he needs to take his mind off work. She surprises him by getting Kevin to join them for drinks. A few drinks in and Oscar has perked up, deep in football conversation with Kevin. Amy decides to leave, bored out of her mind, and the boys spend the rest of the night drinking together, not even missing her presence. Oscar and Kevin end up at a park, playing football with a shoe, and as Kevin collapses on top of Oscar after tackling him, the two are suddenly faced with a very intimate moment, where Kevin confesses he's attracted to Oscar. Oscar is extremely confused at first, but realizes Kevin isn't kidding when he feels his manhood proving the point. Sitting up, Kevin explains that Amy set this whole thing up after he told her how he felt about Oscar when they first met, and that he only realized he was gay a couple years after he broke up with Amy, joking with Oscar that any man that couldn't fall in love with Amy must be gay. Kevin asks Oscar if he'd like to go back to his place for more drinks, and while Oscar is actually flattered, he respectfully declines, explaining to Kevin that he's in love with someone else. Kevin admits that if Amy had told him Oscar was spoken for, he wouldn't have tried anything, but Oscar confides that the person he's in love with is completely involved with someone else. There's no hope for him, really, but he can't help the way he feels. Kevin sympathizes, giving Oscar what's supposed to be a comforting hug. That is, till he passes out right there on his shoulder. Returning home, Oscar immediately tells Amy never to do that to him again, making it clear he doesn't appreciate being set up on dates. Amy lets him into the bathroom as she's having a bath to talk about it, apologizing for not letting him know, and asking him to keep Kevin's sexuality a secret, as he's still sorting his feelings out. Oscar agrees with no question. Amy starts grilling Oscar for more information about his type and his preference on revealing that Kevin is as well endowed as the rumors say, but Oscar learned that tonight already. He tries to excuse himself from the room when Amy lifts her leg up to start shaving, but sits back down after she mentions her own lesbian experience in college. Amy confides that she experimented once with this beautiful Brazilian girl who was part of her philosophy class, and that she'd never be able to talk about this experience with a straight man. They'd be too busy trying to weasel out details about the event, to add to their ridiculous penthouse fantasies of two women. Amy claims the experience was nothing like those dirty movies at all, except for one detail, which she whispers in Oscar's ear. Oscar's self-control is continually tested as she gets out of the bath with no towel, and he resists the urge to peek at her. Oscar wakes to the sound of the radio announcer ranting about someone in the newspaper, who he calls a whiny complainer, and nearly chokes on his toothbrush when the announcer calls his name. Oscar runs to grab the daily paper with Amy, concerned. Following behind him, she screams when she sees the front page plastered with a photo of him and Peter. Amy thinks it's good publicity, but Oscar knows different. All around, as Oscar's friends, parents, and co-workers see the article, most who know him personally are shocked, his father especially. Traveling on the bus that day is very awkward for Oscar, as he gets hit on by a random guy he just happens to make eye contact with. Trying to avoid furthering the conversation, Oscar decides to stand up on the bus instead of sit. But no matter which direction he turns, it seems his privates keep facing the man, who won't stop eyeing him like a predator. When the boys come over to Oscar's like they usually do, all of them are visibly avoiding getting close to him. Oscar tries to explain for the millionth time that he isn't gay, wondering how they could question that now, when they've known him almost their entire lives. The boys admit they've been questioning his sexuality for a while, pointing out Oscar's wall treatments and his love of making hors d'oeuvres. Zach assures him he doesn't care if he's a freak, and Bill claims he personally knew Oscar was gay all along. He's just glad that he's admitted it to himself. Upset with his friend's absurdity, he gives up, sarcastically telling them that yes, he's been gay the whole time, and their years of friendship was all part of his elaborate plans to get into their pants. Oscar even has to explain himself to his mother, who's also completely convinced he's gay, while Oscar's father loses his mind in the background. Oscar returns home to meet a group of Amy's girlfriends, who are all over for girls' night. She invites him to come drink margaritas with them while they talk about all the stupid ways that men hit on them. Curious, one of Amy's friends asks Oscar if he experiences the same lines from men that they do, and Oscar recounts the story of the gentleman on the bus, whose opening line was, "Do you work out?" The girls groan in unison, all of them having heard that one before. Oscar, emboldened and a little drunk, rants about how he hates being objectified by men, and wonders whatever happened to getting to know someone as a person before treating them like a piece of meat. His speech earns applause from the girls, and Amy whispers to a friend that if Oscar weren't gay, he'd be perfect. Oscar downs another drink on hearing that. Oscar and Amy curl up watching an old romance movie, and Amy notes that in movies, the female protagonist always says, "I'd like that," whenever she gets asked out, but she's never heard anyone say that in real life. Oscar volunteers the fun fact that the most spoken line in movies is, "Let's get out of here." Amy thinks that makes sense, considering it works in a lot of scenarios. The two fall asleep together on the couch, and half awake, Oscar takes the moment to curl into her, relishing her scent while he thinks she's asleep, but Amy's awake, and she too nestles herself even deeper into Oscar's arms. It's the night of the event at the Telford, and Oscar greets his guests, his parents and Amy. The crowd is called to view the models, and Novak and Steinberg's model is a huge hit. As Novak, Steinberg and Newman take photos, they're approached by some journalists, who announce that Oscar's been chosen to be awarded as Chicago's Gay Professional of the Year. Oscar doesn't want to accept, but Charles accepts on his behalf, seeing it as the perfect opportunity for publicity, as he's already decided that Novak and Steinberg have won the job, and wants to announce it after. Charles trails off when he notices Amy excitedly chatting with his wife. He drags Oscar over to cover for him. Amy starts heading towards Charles to hug him, but Oscar smoothly intercepts, and as Charles hugs Olivia, she realizes what's going on, her smile quickly fading. Oscar tries to offer the cover story that Amy is his girlfriend, which Olivia finds confusing, because the public thinks Oscar is gay, but Peter smoothly lies that he swings every which way. Awkwardly, Amy leaves, and Oscar goes after her. Amy's in shock, and decides she needs way more alcohol than this. Amy feels guilty, thinking Olivia seemed so nice. She rambles, talking herself into believing it wasn't that big a deal, and she can just pretend it didn't happen. She drags Oscar onto the dance floor in an attempt to distract herself, and while slow dancing, Amy asks Oscar if he's ever kissed a woman before, leaning in before she stops herself. Feeling ridiculous, she storms out, Oscar following her. She feels like such a fool. It would be just like her to fall in love with the most unavailable guy around, a gay man. She can't believe she would make a move on him like that, when all Oscar has done is be kind to her. She tries to shake it off, but Oscar stops her, not buying the tough girl act. He wonders what Amy is doing with Charles, when it's obviously destroying her, but she claims it works, she gets what she needs from him. Oscar reminds her that his wife does too. Amy can't believe she's getting lectured by Oscar, who hasn't been on a single date the entire time they've been together, claiming that he just sits around at home with her, playing it safe. Amy mentions that what she has with Charles isn't perfect. But what does she have with Oscar? She disappears, and Oscar's left pondering, searching for her in all the places they've been before. He visits Charles, asking if he knows where Amy is. Charles puts the blame on Oscar for not taking better care of her, asking him how he could let her get hurt. Oscar, fed up with Charles shirking his responsibility, suggests he try asking himself that question. Charles, ever the egomaniac, reminds Oscar that he holds their $90 million contract in his hands, and that he and Amy's entanglement can't compare to anyone else's. Oscar nervously looks over his speech backstage at the award ceremony, and Peter commends him for his bravery in this whole ordeal. Oscar retorts that if he can't have Amy, pretending to be gay for a while should be fine. He could always sneak off to straight bars and have anonymous sex with straight women. Peter reminds Oscar that there are other fish in the sea, but Oscar starts to offer the possibility of having found the one fish, then changes his mind. He's called to the stage, and as he starts giving his intro, he notices Amy enter the auditorium. He changes his speech, telling the story about the one time he won an award as a child. But in fact, he'd cheated in the game, and he'd felt guilty about it his entire life. The audience is bewildered. He glances at Peter, who gives him an encouraging nod. Oscar continues, confessing to the crowd he admires the bravery of every person here, knowing they can relate to what it feels like living in the shadows, afraid to be who they truly are, and that each of them has fought for the right to declare their love. He reveals that he's not gay, to much murmuring and upset by the crowd. Ignoring them, he confesses his love to Amy, knowing that simply by confessing, he may have lost any chance he had to be with her. But he believes she, and every other person in attendance, deserves this level of honesty. Kevin leads a slow clap, which rises to a round of applause, and Peter proudly encourages Oscar to chase after Amy. A melee ensues when Oscar chases Amy down, attempting to talk to her, and she punches him in the face, pissed that Oscar lied to her. Charles, feeling superior, commends Amy on her well-placed strike, only to receive one himself before she leaves. Decker and Strauss watch the news report from bed together, while Olivia watches from Charles's secret bedroom, chuckling to herself. Peter ends up being the biggest winner of the night when Kevin approaches him, asking him out for a drink. Oscar returns to the terrible diner, about to swallow another toxic tuna melt. When Amy appears, stopping him, she has things she needs to ask. She interrogates him on whether he's proud of himself, if he really thinks it was all worth it. Oscar hangs his head, ashamed, but knowing he deserves this scolding. The last thing she demands of him is, Amy gets the left side of the bed now. Oscar's face slowly lights up as he realizes what this means. Taking his hand, Amy proposes they get out of there. Cheesily, Oscar admits he'd like that.